Okay, then I think we will get ready to go here in 3, 2, 1. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Jeff Frick here, coming to you from Austin, Texas, and let me tell you, it's warm in Austin today. Special edition of Work 20XX. We're on the road here at Running Remote. Excited to do a great collaboration with them and come down and talk to really the leaders of everything remote. But what's more important to know is that most of the best practices to run fully remote companies are also applicable to hybrid companies, in-office companies, and everything in between. So there's a lot of great lessons, and it's been a packed agenda, 2 stages going nonstop, and we're excited to have our next guest. He actually just got off the main stage, so he should be fresh and have all those things top of mind. So welcoming in, he's Brian Robertson, the co-founder of Holacracy.
Thank you, Jeff.
Brian, great to see you. So getting ready for this, I saw your TED Talk on Holacracy a few years back. Give people a basic 101 that what is it all about?
Yeah, so Holacracy is a management framework. It's a different way than we're used to break down and structure who does what do we expect of each other, who has what authority. Ultimately, what it does is create a system that is deeply empowering, where people know what they can do without going to the meetings, without running things up the flagpole. It gives people a ground of significant ability to self-lead and self-manage.
Okay, so I'm going to use an example that you just used, which I thought was pretty illustrative, and that was comparing a traffic intersection that has lights or stop signs with one that's a roundabout. And you made a really interesting compare. One is you give up control of when you go and when you don't go, and the other one you kind of have to work it out. You have some agency, you have some responsibility. The net is one's a lot more safer, one gets a lot more traffic through, one is a lot better than the other.
Yeah, and that's the roundabout, right? We consistently see in studies they're more efficient, more effective, safer, all of these, and yet they also require more of the driver, right?
Right.
In a typical stoplight, you get to just wait to be told what to do, just like in a typical company. And yet it works better when people retain more responsibility for leadership, and you have to in a roundabout, right? And yet a lot of our companies look more like stoplights. People are waiting and outsourcing their agency and leadership to the system, the managers, the management hierarchy, or even just the meetings,
right,
as opposed to really retaining their leadership capacity and coordinating themselves in real time with others. When you do that, it works better. It's harder, but it works better.
Right. And kind of this concept of getting rid of pure command and control. And you talk about not only the roundabout, but just the way that cities operate and that the way things flow and get done. That there isn't some master commander sitting at the top looking down like a train switcher guy, kind of operating everything. That everyone's kind of doing their piece with their agency to fulfill whatever they're trying to get done.
Yeah, in fact, there's been studies on this too, and cities tend to, as they get larger, they get more, there's more innovation per resident, right? The average, different measures of innovation, productivity, tends to go up as cities get larger, but we see the exact opposite in companies. As companies get larger, the productivity and innovation per person go down, not up.
Right.
And that, I think, is a symptom of the very different control systems. Cities are more self-organizing. They leave people more freedom to locally adapt and to figure out what makes sense to them and to lead their own life.
Right.
Whereas a lot of companies are trying to structure in a more top-down command and control way, which actually works great for very simple problem sets. But we live in a world today of overwhelming complexity, and complex adaptive systems don't work well with that. And that's exactly what companies have to be today.
Right. Now, it's interesting. There's a lot of talk about empowerment, which kind of goes with agency and empowering people to have more responsibility. But you made an interesting take. Don't empower the people, you empower the system. Yeah. Explain the nuance there.
Yeah, well, one, just notice the paradox and the irony. If you need someone else to empower you, if you need the boss, the leader to empower you, what does that say about you and the system you're in? You're in a fundamentally disempowering system if you have to sit around and wait for somebody else to empower you. So there's an irony there. And as a leader, if you just go to your team tomorrow and you tell everyone, good news, you're empowered, you don't get an empowered team, you get a lot of confused people. Because people know there's really limits on their empowerment. There must be something they shouldn't do without going to the right process or person or whatever. So if you want to really empower people, what you need to do is empower the system they're in by clarifying limits and constraints. If you don't know your limits, you don't know your freedom. Right? If you don't know what you really shouldn't do without talking to somebody or getting approval somewhere, then you don't know what you can do without talking to anyone. You don't know what's yours to lead. So ironically, the thing we often push against in empowerment is structure. We often try to get rid of it, and to some extent that's really useful when the structure is useless in bureaucracy. But what we need to do equally is focus on how do we clarify the structure we really need, the limits we really need, and how do we keep it agile so we can evolve it? We don't just get calcified structure that can never change. How do we get structure that is nimble, that's learning with us, so that everyone knows exactly where the limits of their authority are?
Right, right.
Because then they're invited to step up and use real power within those limits.
So you talked about this concept that again feels at first blush as being in conflict, but that freedom does better with limits, and that actually you get more freedom within a defined set of limits. Is that for clarity's sake? I wonder if you can expound on that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, so when people don't know where the limits are, they're going to spend a lot of time and energy trying to either tiptoe around and look for the limits or just be cautious and conservative, right? There was a study on this with kids that illustrated it really well. Kindergartners, they measured, some Department of Education did this, they measured how far out did they spread in the field to play at recess, right? And they found the kids mostly clustered pretty close in near the playground, and until they added a fence around the far out perimeter of the property, and the fence was, 2 feet high. It wasn't keeping anyone out or in.
Right,
But
right.
as soon as they did that, the kids spread out. They used the freedom. They knew where the boundary was, and so they filled the space. They did so confidently and safely. Now, you can bring that, we're not that different than kindergartners in workforces sometimes.
No, we're not.
Right? When people don't know what they shouldn't do, the natural impulse is to be either a little cautious, a little conservative, and kind of keep in, or just let's be safe. Let's call that meeting and try to socialize the thing and get the buy-in, and
Right,
that's
right.
very expensive and time-consuming. When you clarify the limits for people, you can invite them to spread out, to use their freedom. Go lead. Don't, as an entrepreneur, I've been an entrepreneur for decades. I don't go check in with everybody before I do anything, right? I know where the things are I really need to, and I
Right,
focus
right.
on clarifying that in my company and for others. And then I lead. I use my judgment, I use my power, and I lead. And I trust when I end up accidentally doing something that's maybe less than desirable, that becomes great learning fodder, right? We can use that to clarify how do we improve a process or a policy or a limit so we don't make that mistake again, right?
Right.
The tensions become the fuel for evolution in our company when we have an agile system like that at play.
Okay, so another interesting one was you talked about the illusion of limits. So there's one thing to know your limits, and then unfortunately we put limits on ourselves that maybe shouldn't be there, or maybe we're putting way too many limits that inhibit our ability to do more.
Yeah, exactly. And this goes back to the clarity thing. When people don't know what the limits are, they tend to assume what they are, and the assumption's often very conservative. And sometimes this is a challenge when you're trying to change a culture, right? If people if they're in the habit of not using real autonomy and authority, then even if you try to change that, the habit still remains,
Right, right.
So the culture change here is an important one. And what we're really trying to do in the work I do and the framework I use is shift people from a more restrictive culture, which is in most companies today, there's an implicit norm that says, don't do anything you don't normally do without getting permission. And you get permission either by running it up the management chain or more likely by calling a big meeting and socializing it and make sure everyone's bought in, which is very expensive and time consuming, right? And the default culture though is don't act outside of your normal thing without permission. And what we want to do is flip that to a permissive culture that says, you know what? Use your judgment and lead, even if it means doing things you don't normally do. You have permission by default to take any action or any decision you want in the company unless there's a rule against it.
Right, right.
And when you have that, then the emphasis becomes, let's clarify the minimally sufficient rules to keep things safe. And that we can do partly over time by learning together when we need to add a limit. Right? And when you get people used to that culture, you end up with a company that looks like a company full of business partners or entrepreneurs, not employees.
Right.
Right? And this happened in my career. I hit a point where I said, I am done with employees. I want the whole company to feel like co-founders who are really owning and using real authority. And to do that, you need a culture that says, own your role and lead, make decisions, use judgment, don't call the meetings, don't run it up the flagpole, use your authority, and what we'll focus on instead is getting the clarity of when you really shouldn't do that.
Right.
And if you can trust that clarity, you can trust your freedom.
So why are you asking me why haven't you done it already, right? That's your response.
Yeah.
So one of the concepts within Holacracy, which is different, and I know people are probably excited to hear about it, is roles instead of job descriptions.
Yeah.
First off, nobody likes writing job descriptions.
Yeah.
And to your point, no one actually ever looks at them again after they got written, after they got hired. And you made a funny line. Nobody goes to the job description to find the person that they need to do something because it's in their job description.
Yeah.
So talk about defining roles and how that's a different kind of strategy.
Yeah, so we use a role structure so the role is just a small function. You might fill 10 roles or 20 roles or more, and maybe on many different teams in your company. That's normal, just like in life. We fill many roles in our life. You know, we might be a father and a husband and the kitchen cleaner and whatever other roles.
Right.
And when you define the roles, not looking for perfect theoretical clarity, which is how job descriptions are often defined, but minimally sufficient clarity. Let's just capture in this role enough to give somebody a general orientation and to solve any issues we've actually really had. So many of the roles, when I start working with a company with this, many of the roles are very lightweight. They just have a clear purpose that tells people, you know, why they're doing what they're doing. Maybe one or two explicit expectations because we know there's been past issues and this clarity is important to capture. And then from there, go and let's learn together, and we add expectations over time to these roles as we figure out what we really need to be able to count on, right? So for example, true story, long ago in one of the companies I've founded, we had a case. I do a lot of public speaking like this, and I fill a role called spokesperson, one of 20 roles in this company I filled. And I worked with somebody in a role called casting agent who had to book me for talks and would often get frustrated because she'd go and, you know, she'd build a relationship with a conference organizer, negotiate the terms, the talk, and all that. She'd present it to me at the end, and sometimes I'd say, no, it's not a good fit. You know, not the right market or not big enough or whatever. It's not worth my time. And she felt really disempowered, right? She spent a lot of time and energy on this, and I shoot it down at the end. So we have a process in place where she can propose changes to any other role in this team. We're both in the marketing team together, these two roles. So she proposes, hey, let's add an accountability, an expectation on the spokesperson role that I fill. Right? It's actually, notice, not about her and I, it's about the roles. It's already depersonalized a level. She proposes adding the expectation on the spokesperson role for documenting the criteria you're going to use to accept or reject engagements and sticking with it. And it took about 2 minutes in that meeting process for that expectation to get added, and then she turns to me and says, so, when will you have that drafted for me by, you think? And the interesting footnote of this story, I'm the founder of this company and a seasoned CEO for many years. She was our newest hire right out of college. And in what company do you know where the newest hire right out of college in 2 minutes can add an expectation onto the founder and then turn to him and say, so when will you have that done for me by? Right? That's agile structure, right? And that's learning. And now the roles are real because they're capturing what we've really learned together we need to do. People reference their roles. They look up colleagues' roles to know what they can request of them. And more importantly, we have a meta process, a governance process, we call it, to evolve all these roles and the policies and all that. So everything in the structure can stay agile and nimble. We can remove structure when it's in the way. We can add structure when there's ambiguity slowing us down, like that case. When structure becomes agile, we can trust it, and then we can go fast.
So how long did it take you to give her the goods?
Yeah, I don't remember. Probably, honestly, a few weeks at that point.
Oh, come on. So it's interesting. There's a lot of conversation here about clarity of goals and making sure that people are aligned. And I think Sasha was talking about when she does her workshops with people. Is everybody on board with the goals? Yeah. Is everybody excited about the goals? Yeah. Okay, everybody write down the goals. Not three things are written down the same. But you've really generalized that clarity at a higher level is really key, being kind of almost the key attribute of a highly functioning organization. So I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, why clarity is important and how you can expand it well beyond just the goals or one particular area, but really adopt it as a company-wide philosophy.
I think for me, this is one of the most important jobs of any leader in the organization, from the very top to literally anyone. Organizational clarity. Organizational clarity is needed for everything else. It enables speed. It cuts down on all the politics and all the mess. If you're in a remote environment, a lot of the tools we have in in-person environments are meant to make up for lack of clarity. We have more meetings. We have more FaceTime. Well, that's a lot harder when you're remote and you're on Zoom.
Right.
Clarity is even more important. Organizational clarity doesn't just stop at the projects and actions and goals, which is where most organizations get the importance of, all right, we need clear, actions, who's going to do what, and clear goals. that's the kind of runway level, but we need the 50,000-foot view as well. We need clear purpose, and we need in between, which is about the roles and the expectations. Right. The more we have clarity throughout, from the broadest, highest level purpose to how do we break down that work, what are the roles, what do we expect of each other, who's making which decisions, and then the goals and the projects and the actions and all that stuff. That level of clarity enables people to self-manage and self-lead. When you have all that clarity, you don't need to go to the meetings. You don't need to go to the managers. These are the fallbacks we have when we don't know who makes a decision. And then a lot of managers get stuck in firefighting mode where, instead of architecting the system and clarifying things, they're jumping and putting out fires. And that can be quite addictive, right? It feels good to be the superhero that gets to jump in and save the day.
Right, when you're not actually doing anything of material wealth.
Yeah, but I like to think the role of a good leader or manager in a company is much like a parent, right? When I have a 2-year-old and they run out into the middle of the road, it's appropriate to be a superhero, firefight, save the day, grab them, pull them out of the way. But don't stop there. Teach them to look both ways. If you still have to do that when they're 20, you missed something. Your goal is to obsolete yourself. Your goal is to build the structures in them so that you don't need to be the superhero leader saving the day for them. Right? And I think we can apply that as a manager or a leader in a company too. How do we use clarity to work ourselves out of a job? This is what every entrepreneur needs to do. Right? And I think the best companies, they don't need managers per se, they need entrepreneurs. And the role of a manager shifts to more like the role of an entrepreneur. Create clarity so that people can lead themselves instead of them jumping in and calling all the shots, making all the decisions.
Yeah, that's great. Well said and very clear, I have to say.
Thank you.
Well, Brian, it's really been a treat. I love the philosophy, and I think the clarity message is so important and can be expanded so far beyond. And then, like you say, basically try to write yourself out of the job by giving people the autonomy so they know what to do. Yep. All right. Thanks again for stopping by.
Thank you so much.
And congrats on the book, the TED Talk. You got all kinds of stuff going on.
Yes, indeed.
All right. He's Brian. I'm Jeff. You're watching Work 20XX. We're coming to you from Running Remote in Austin, Texas. It is hot in Austin, Texas. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. That was fun. Thank you.